Hey there, welcome. Tonight, we'll travel together through the shadowed corners of Hawkins, Indiana, exploring the darkest theories and whispered possibilities surrounding Stranger Things' final chapter. As you settle into your comfortable space, let the gentle flow of speculation carry you into peaceful dreams. Every mystery holds its own fascination, its own story waiting to be examined. The series that began in 2016 with a boy's disappearance into an alternate dimension has woven mysteries across 8 years and 4 seasons. Some questions received answers. Others deepened into riddles that kept fans theorizing through countless rewatches and frame-by-frame analyses. Season 5, arriving in the autumn of 2025, promises resolution to puzzles that have haunted viewers since Will Byers first vanished on that November night in 1983. These theories, disturbing though they may sound, offer the peculiar comfort of fictional fears. The monsters wait only in stories, and stories provide safe spaces to explore darkness from the security of our own warm beds. Tonight's journey examines 5 possibilities that fans have pieced together from trailer glimpses, cast interviews, and patterns woven throughout 4 seasons. So let's begin with the theory that has haunted fans since Will Byers first emerged from that dark dimension, forever changed. The theory begins with a single question posed since Stranger Things premiered in 2016. Why did Will Byers survive? On November 6, 1983, a 12-year-old boy cycled home from a friend's house through the dark roads outside Hawkins, Indiana. He never arrived. The creature that took him, later identified as a Demogorgon, dragged him into an alternate dimension where the air itself was toxic, where darkness pressed against everything, where monsters hunted freely. Will remained in that hostile environment for 7 days. He had no weapons, no training, no understanding of what had happened to him. He was a child who enjoyed Dungeons and Dragons and building forts with his brother, yet he lived. Other victims didn't share his fortune. Barbara Holland, taken to the Upside Down the very next day, died within hours. Her body was discovered cocooned in the library, drained and lifeless. The dimension had claimed her quickly and completely. Will, by contrast, evaded the Demogorgon repeatedly, found ways to communicate with his mother through electricity and Christmas lights, constructed hiding places, and maintained his sanity through a week that should have destroyed him psychologically, even if it hadn't killed him physically. The disparity seemed impossible to explain through mere luck or resourcefulness. A child surviving where a teenager perished suggested something beyond conventional explanation. Fans began theorizing immediately, after Season 1's conclusion, that Will possessed qualities the show hadn't yet revealed. His survival wasn't fortunate, it was significant. The evidence accumulated slowly across subsequent seasons, pieces of a puzzle that would take years to assemble. Season 2 brought the first confirmation that Will's time in the Upside Down had fundamentally altered him. The connection to that dimension persisted despite his physical rescue. He experienced what his mother Joyce described as episodes, moments where he seemed to slip between worlds, witnessing the Upside Down bleeding through into Hawkins. These weren't flashbacks or psychological trauma manifestations. They were visions of events occurring in real time. The Mind Flayer recognized this connection and exploited it. The massive shadow creature that ruled the Upside Down's hive mind possessed Will's body, using him as a spy to observe Hawkins, and eventually as a conduit to bring other creatures through. The possession demonstrated that Will had become something unique, a bridge between dimensions that the Mind Flayer found valuable enough to control rather than simply kill. Dr. Owens and his team at Hawkins Laboratory studied Will's condition with concern that bordered on alarm. They recognized patterns in his episodes, connections to temperature changes in the Upside Down, responses to the Mind Flayer's presence. Will could sense when the dimension drew near, when gates opened, when danger approached. His body reacted to supernatural presence, the way others might react to changes in barometric pressure before storms. He had become a living sensor for dimensional instability. The exorcism that freed Will from the Mind Flayer's direct control in Season 2's conclusion involved exposing him to extreme heat, burning the shadow out of him through raising his body temperature to dangerous levels. Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy nearly killed him to save him. The procedure worked. The Mind Flayer withdrew, but the connection remained. Season 3 revealed this truth gradually. Will moved to California with his family and 11, putting hundreds of miles between himself and Hawkins. The distance should have severed any lingering bonds to the Upside Down. Instead, halfway across the country, Will felt the Mind Flayer's return before anyone in Hawkins realized the danger had resumed. He touched the back of his neck, the spot where the Mind Flayer had first infected him, and knew with absolute certainty that something had awakened. He was right. The Russians had reopened the gate beneath Starcourt Mall, allowing the Mind Flayer to once again reach into Hawkins. Will sensed this development from California, despite having no contact with the source. The psychic connection transcended physical distance entirely. Whatever had been done to him during his week in the Upside Down, whatever changes had occurred in his body or mind, they persisted regardless of geography or time. Season 4 reinforced this pattern with devastating clarity. The Byers family returned to California after the Battle of Starcourt, attempting once more to build normal lives away from supernatural horrors. Will continued his quiet existence, grappling with feelings he couldn't express about his best friend, Mike Wheeler, adjusting to new schools and new routines. Then came the spring of 1986, when a new threat emerged in Hawkins. Vecna began killing teenagers through psychic attacks, opening gates with each murder. Will felt it immediately. The scene occurred in the desert outside Hawkins, hundreds of miles from the town where gates were opening. Will stood with Mike, Jonathan, and their allies, and suddenly touched his neck again. That familiar gesture, repeated across 3 seasons. His face showed recognition and dread. "He's not gone," Will said quietly. The Mind Flayer, the darkness, the connection he thought had been burned away, it persisted still. The evil hadn't died, it had merely waited. By Season 4's conclusion, Will's sensitivity to the Upside Down had evolved beyond simple awareness. He could distinguish between different types of supernatural presence. He understood, before 11 did, that something had changed in Hawkins' supernatural landscape. Standing in the upside-down version of his own home, he explained to Mike that he could feel Vecna's emotions and intentions. "He's hurt, angry," Will said. "He wants to kill everyone, except me." The specificity of this knowledge suggested comprehension that exceeded mere psychic sensitivity. Will had become attuned not just to the Upside Down's presence, but to its ruler's thoughts and feelings. Vecna, revealed to be Henry Creel, the first of Dr. Brenner's test subjects, commanded the Upside Down's hive mind. He controlled the Mind Flayer, the Demogorgons, every creature in that dimension. Will could sense him specifically, could interpret his emotional state, could understand his targeting priorities. This represented abilities far beyond anything attributed to trauma or lingering possession effects. The question that emerged from these accumulated moments across 4 seasons demanded consideration. Did Will's connection to the Upside Down function purely as receptive awareness, or did it indicate latent abilities that hadn't yet manifested? 11 had spent years training her psychic powers in Hawkins' laboratory before demonstrating them publicly. Her abilities developed through Dr. Brenner's systematic, brutal program of exercises and psychological manipulation. Will had undergone no such training. Yet his week in the Upside Down, his possession by the Mind Flayer, his repeated exposure to dimensional energies, these experiences might have accomplished what Brenner's laboratory had done for his test subjects. They might have awakened something dormant. The theory gained particular traction from one specific detail revealed in Season 4. Nancy Wheeler discovered that the upside-down version of Hawkins appeared frozen in time, locked eternally on November 6, 1983. The dimension reflected the town as it had existed on that precise date. Not the day before, not the day after. The exact moment when Will Byers was taken. This couldn't be coincidental. The Upside Down had existed before Will's arrival. That much was confirmed. Vecna had been banished there in 1979, 4 years before Will's disappearance. The dimension had its own history, stretching back potentially millions of years. Yet somehow, when it created its mirror of Hawkins, it chose November 6, 1983, as the moment to replicate and preserve. Fans theorized several explanations for this temporal freezing. Some suggested Eleven's opening of the gate on that date had created the snapshot, that her psychic connection to the Demogorgon, while in the sensory deprivation tank at Hawkins' lab, had forged the dimensional copy at that specific moment. Others proposed that Vecna had deliberately chosen that date because it represented the beginning of his plan to merge dimensions, making it symbolically significant. But a third possibility attracted substantial attention. The Upside Down froze on November 6, 1983, because that was when Will Byers entered it. His presence in the dimension, his fear and trauma and desperate need for familiarity had psychically projected Hawkins into the Upside Down as it existed at the moment of his arrival. He had created the mirror world through unconscious psychic power, awakened by extreme emotional distress. Evidence for this theory extended beyond the temporal coincidence. Will's safe space in the real world was Castle Byers, a fort constructed in the woods behind his house. Jonathan and Will had built it together on the night their father, Lonnie, left the family, working through a storm to create something permanent and protective. The fort represented security and brotherly love. Will had drawn pictures of Castle Byers before its construction, imagining it into existence through artwork that decorated its interior. In the Upside Down, Castle Byers existed, not just as a mirror of the real-world structure, but as a sanctuary where Will retreated repeatedly during his week of survival. The dimension somehow recognized his need for safety and provided it. The fort appeared in the dark forest, a beacon of familiarity in alien terrain. Will hid there from the Demogorgon, used it as a base, sang the song his mother had sung to him as a child, while cowering in its perceived protection. If Will could unconsciously project a small wooden fort into the Upside Down through emotional need, couldn't he have projected an entire town through that same mechanism? His mind, desperate for anything familiar, while trapped in incomprehensible darkness, might have seized upon memories of home with such intensity that the dimension itself responded. The Upside Down, perhaps possessing some form of consciousness or simply reactive to psychic energy, could have absorbed these projections and manifested them physically. This theory transformed Will from passive victim to unknowing architect of the show's entire visual landscape. Every shot of the Upside Downs, decaying houses, its twisted version of Hawkins Middle School, its corrupted Main Street, all of it might exist because a terrified 12-year-old boy needed to see something recognizable in the darkness. The dimension's most iconic aesthetic feature would be, in essence, Will's psychological imprint. Season 4 offered additional support through Henry Creel's own transformation. When Eleven banished him to what was then called Dimension X in 1979, that realm appeared as a barren wasteland of rock formations and lightning storms. No structures, no familiar landmarks, just alien geology and hostile atmosphere. Henry survived in that environment for 4 years before Eleven opened the gate in 1983. During that time, he'd developed his psychic powers further, shaped the native Mind Flayer entity into his weapon, and waited for opportunity. But he hadn't created a copy of Hawkins. That appeared only after Will's arrival. The implications extended beyond passive projection. If Will had unconsciously shaped the dimension once, Might he possess the ability to do so consciously? Could his powers, if properly awakened and trained, rival Eleven's? The show's mythology established that trauma and extreme emotional states unlocked psychic abilities in those with latent potential. Eleven's powers manifested strongest when she felt fear, anger, or protective rage. Will had experienced trauma, perhaps more profound than any other character. Kidnapping, near-death survival, possession, exile from his home, loss of his childhood, and the crushing burden of secrets about his identity and feelings. All that suppressed pain might fuel extraordinary power if channeled properly. The Dungeons and Dragons framework that the show embraced provided another layer of foreshadowing. Will's character in the ongoing campaign run by Mike and his friends was Will the Wise, a cleric-class character focused on healing and support rather than direct combat. The name suggested prophetic ability, wisdom beyond years, insight into forces others couldn't perceive. The show used Dungeons and Dragons references throughout its run as meta-commentary on the plot. The Demogorgon was named after the monster the boys were fighting when Will disappeared. The Mind Flayer took its name from a D&D creature that enslaved minds. Vecna himself was named for a powerful lich wizard from the game's lore. In the game's first season, during the campaign session at Mike's house, when Will went missing in the real world, the party faced defeat. Mike, as Dungeon Master, declared that Will needed to make a saving throw against the Demogorgon. Will rolled a 7. Not high enough, the creature attacked. This gaming moment paralleled Will's real abduction, happening simultaneously, the narrative suggesting that the game and reality shared connections deeper than coincidence. In Season 4's opening episode, Dustin Henderson attempted to defeat Vecna in their D&D campaign. He needed to roll a 20, the perfect roll that succeeds automatically regardless of difficulty. He rolled an 11, the number that belonged to their friend with psychic powers. It wasn't enough. Vecna won that round in the game, just as Vecna would dominate much of Season 4 in reality. Fans dissected these gaming parallels obsessively, searching for patterns that might predict Season 5's outcome. One theory emerged with particular mathematical elegance. 11's number combined with Will's character designation created the total needed for victory. 11 plus Will the Wise equals success against Vecna. The theory suggested that defeating the ultimate villain would require both psychics working together, combining their abilities into something greater than either possessed alone. This interpretation gained credibility from Mike's speech in Season 4 about how 11 had become more powerful when she accepted that she wasn't alone, that she had friends supporting her. Isolated power had limits, connected power multiplied. If Will possessed abilities comparable to 11's, their partnership could achieve what individual strength couldn't. The show's creators, Matt and Ross Duffer, had built their mythology carefully across 4 seasons. They planted seeds years before harvest, established patterns that rewarded attentive viewing, created a world where details mattered. Will's repeated touching of his neck, his psychic sensitivity, his survival against impossible odds, the temporal freezing of the Upside Down on his arrival date, the Castle Buyer's manifestation, even his D&D character name. All of these elements pointed towards significance beyond what had been explicitly stated. Season 5's promotional material added fuel to speculation rather than providing definitive answers. The first teaser trailer, released in late 2024, showed brief glimpses of footage carefully selected to tantalize without revealing. Among those glimpses appeared several shots suggesting Will's central importance to the final confrontation. One moment showed Will in clear distress, his face contorted with fear or pain, screaming a warning. "Run! Run!" His voice carried desperate urgency. The context remained unclear, but the intensity suggested he was perceiving danger others couldn't yet see. His prophetic awareness, manifesting at a crucial moment, Another shot, brief and easily missed, showed a figure lying unconscious on the ground. The white shoes, visible in frame, matched those photographed on Noah Schnapp during Season 5's production. Fans speculated this showed Will after some kind of psychic attack or overwhelming vision. A person, possibly Joyce, based on the partial figure visible, knelt beside him. The scene suggested Will pushing his abilities beyond safe limits, paying a physical price for using powers he didn't fully understand or control. Most significantly, the trailer included a moment that seemed to confirm theories about Vecna's interest in Will. In the upside-down version of Hawkins' public library, the location where the Demogorgon had taken its victims in Season 1, Vecna walked towards something on the ground. His appearance showed him before the injuries sustained in Season 4's finale, suggesting this footage depicted either a flashback or a vision. The camera focused on Vecna's twisted hand, reaching toward the ground as he moved with deliberate purpose. Some fans believed the figure on the library floor was Will from Season 1, that the scene would reveal Vecna had indeed been present during Will's week of survival, that the kidnapping hadn't been random Demogorgon hunting, but calculated abduction on Vecna's orders. Others interpreted the scene differently, suggesting it depicted Season 5's present timeline, showing Vecna capturing Will for purposes yet unrevealed. Then came the line heard in voiceover, Vecna's distorted voice, speaking with cold certainty. "Will, you're going to help me one last time." The phrasing acknowledged previous assistance, intentional or not. Will had helped Vecna before, presumably through being possessed by the Mind Flayer or through unknowingly creating the Hawkins mirror in the Upside Down that Vecna had used for his murders. Now Vecna planned to use him again, making Will integral to whatever apocalyptic conclusion the villain had designed. The trailer moment showed Vecna using telekinetic power to lift someone off the ground and drag them closer. The figure appeared to be Will based on clothing and build visible in the shot. This visual confirmed that Vecna intended physical confrontation with Will, that their connection would manifest in direct interaction rather than remaining psychic distance. Noah Schnapp, the actor portraying Will, had given interviews about Season 5 that carefully avoided spoilers while hinting at significance. He described Will's arc as central to the final season, suggested that the character who had started the show's journey would be crucial to ending it, emphasized emotional weight and consequences that had left him crying while watching rough cuts of episodes. The Duffer Brothers themselves had stated in various interviews that Season 5 would return to the show's roots, that Will's importance would become clear, that mysteries from Season 1 would finally receive answers. All evidence pointed toward Will Byers possessing abilities that exceeded simple psychic sensitivity. Whether he had created the Upside Down's Hawkins mirror through unconscious projection, whether he could sense Vecna's thoughts through their connection, whether he held power comparable to Eleven's that had never been trained or activated, the accumulated details suggested revelation rather than coincidence. The theory's most disturbing implication involved Will's potential fate. If he indeed possessed power that Vecna needed, the final season might force terrible choices. Would Will sacrifice himself to destroy the villain? Would he have to enter the Upside Down permanently to close gates from within? Would his connection to that dimension prove both salvation and curse, allowing victory but demanding exile? Or would the power within him finally manifest fully, allowing him to stand beside 11 as an equal, wielding abilities dormant since that November night in 1983 when he vanished into darkness and somehow, impossibly, survived? These questions would face answers soon. The boy who had been taken first might be the key to ending what his disappearance had begun. Will the wise prophet and survivor waited in California for the final battle that would determine not just Hawkins' fate, but the fate of dimensions bleeding together in apocalyptic convergence. While Will's powers remained dormant possibilities, another theory examined the Upside Down itself, questioning whether this dimension was truly what it appeared to be. The Upside Down has existed since Stranger Things' opening moments, yet its true nature remained one of television's most compelling mysteries. This alternate dimension, visible through gates torn in reality, mirrored Hawkins, Indiana, in disturbing detail. Streets aligned precisely with their real-world counterparts. Houses stood in correct positions, though decaying and corrupted. The geography matched perfectly, while the atmosphere transformed everything into nightmare landscape, shrouded in floating particles and perpetual darkness. Official explanations described it as a parallel dimension existing alongside the human world, accessible through rifts that functioned as tears in the fabric of reality. Millie Bobby Brown, who portrayed Eleven throughout the series, addressed speculation directly in a 2022 interview with Variety. When asked whether Eleven had created the Upside Down by opening the gate at Hawkins' laboratory, she provided clarification she'd received from the show's creators themselves. The alternate dimension had always existed. Eleven didn't create it. She merely opened access to something that had been there long before November 1983, before Hawkins' laboratory's experiments, before Dr. Brenner's program of psychic development in children. The Upside Down was ancient, possibly millions of years old, according to Dustin Henderson's theorizing in Season 2. Eleven had discovered a doorway, not built a dimension. This official stance settled certain debates while raising others. If the Upside Down pre-existed human contact, what was its origin? Why did it mirror Hawkins specifically? When did it transform from alien wasteland into twisted reflection of an Indiana town? Season 4's flashback to 1979 revealed crucial information. When Eleven banished Henry Creel to another dimension after he'd massacred the other children at Hawkins' laboratory, the place he arrived bore no resemblance to the Upside Down familiar to viewers. That earlier realm, designated Dimension X in production materials and the stage play prequel Stranger Things, the first shadow appeared barren and hostile. Rock formations jutted from lifeless ground. Lightning storms provided the only illumination. No structures, no vegetation beyond strange vines, no comforting familiarity whatsoever. Henry survived there for 4 years, from 1979 to 1983. During that isolation, he encountered the dimension's native inhabitant, a massive shadow entity that would later be identified as the Mind Flayer. Rather than being destroyed by this creature, Henry somehow gained control over it, shaping its amorphous form into the spider-like silhouette that terrorized Hawkins in subsequent seasons. He became master of Dimension X, commander of its hive mind, architect of its horrors, but the dimension still didn't mirror Hawkins. That transformation occurred later. On November 6, 1983, when Eleven made psychic contact with a Demogorgon while in the sensory deprivation tank at Hawkins' laboratory, she tore open the first stable gate between dimensions. The Mother Gate, as it came to be known, connected Hawkins directly to what had been Dimension X. At some point during or shortly after this connection, the dimension absorbed a complete copy of Hawkins as it existed at that precise moment. The mechanism behind this replication remained disputed. Some theorists suggested the gate itself functioned as a copying device, that the psychic energy involved in bridging dimensions created a snapshot effect. Others proposed that Henry Creel, aware of the gate opening, had consciously shaped his domain to mirror Hawkins for strategic purposes. Still others believed something about human consciousness entering the dimension triggered automatic mimicry, that Dimension X responded to thought and memory by manifesting physical representations. Whatever the cause, the result was undeniable. The Upside Down existed as Hawkins' shadow twin, frozen in time at the moment of first contact. Beyond these established facts lay theories that proposed radical reinterpretations of the dimension's fundamental nature. The most persistent among these suggested the upside down wasn't a parallel dimension at all, but rather a future version of Hawkins itself, transformed by catastrophic events, yet to occur in the show's present timeline. This time loop theory drew comparisons to another Netflix series, Dark, which had premiered in 2017 and concluded in 2020. That German science fiction thriller followed characters attempting to prevent an apocalypse through manipulation of time travel across multiple timelines. The show's complex temporal mechanics and dark atmosphere created obvious parallels with Stranger Things, despite differing in tone and structure. Both series featured missing children, government conspiracies, and alternate versions of familiar locations transformed by supernatural forces. The dark comparison suggested Stranger Things might reveal a similar temporal twist. What if the upside down represented not a parallel dimension, but Hawkins' own future, reached through tears in time rather than space? The theory proposed that some future catastrophe, possibly nuclear in nature, would devastate Hawkins so completely that the ruined town became the upside down observed throughout the series. Time travelers or dimensional explorers would then be visiting not another world, but their own world's apocalyptic end state. Evidence supporting this interpretation focused heavily on the upside down's environmental characteristics. The dimension appeared frozen and lifeless, as if some massive destructive event had killed everything biological in an instant. Plant life existed only as desiccated remnants, trees bare and twisted, grass dead and colourless. No animals or insects moved through the landscape. The air itself carried toxic qualities that caused illness in those exposed for extended periods. Spores floated constantly through the atmosphere, suggesting fallout or contamination rather than natural weather patterns. Most significantly, the upside down displayed visual characteristics consistent with nuclear aftermath. Everything bore a coating of ash-like substance. Structures showed damage patterns suggesting intense heat or blast effects. The perpetual darkness could represent nuclear winter, where atmospheric particles blocked sunlight indefinitely. Even the colour palette, dominated by sickly greens and greys, recalled artistic depictions of post-nuclear landscapes. The theory proposed two possible scenarios for how nuclear catastrophe might create the upside down. The first suggested that in attempting to close gates and prevent dimensional invasion, the United States government or military might resort to nuclear options, believing obliteration preferable to allowing monsters free rein. A nuclear strike on Hawkins would certainly create an environment matching the upside down's dead toxic atmosphere. The devastation would freeze the town in the moment of destruction, preserving structures while annihilating all life. The second scenario involved Cold War tensions finally erupting into nuclear exchange. Stranger Things' 1980s setting placed it during a period when nuclear war remained a genuine concern in global consciousness. The show referenced this anxiety repeatedly, particularly through the Soviet presence in Season 3's plot involving the secret base beneath Starcourt Mall. If the mounting tensions depicted throughout the series eventually triggered nuclear conflict, Hawkins could be caught in the exchange, destroyed along with countless other locations. In this interpretation, the monsters inhabiting the Upside Down weren't supernatural creatures from another dimension, but rather mutations caused by radiation exposure. The Demogorgon's eyeless face and petal-like mouth could represent grotesque evolutionary adaptation to post-nuclear environment. The Mind Flayer might be a mutated human or collective of humans, their consciousness fused through radiation into a singular entity. Even the hive-mind connection between creatures could be explained as shared contamination, creating psychic links. This reading transformed the show's entire mythology from supernatural horror into science fiction tragedy. The characters wouldn't be fighting otherworldly invaders, but rather confronting their own future, attempting to prevent or alter events that would lead to Hawkins' nuclear destruction. Every gate opened, every creature that crossed dimensions would be warning signs of the approaching apocalypse rather than invasions from elsewhere. The theory's proponents noted that such a revelation would align with common science fiction storytelling traditions. Time loop narratives where characters discovered they'd been fighting their own future were well established in literature and film. The dramatic irony of heroes unknowingly trying to prevent their own apocalyptic end provided powerful emotional resonance. Moreover, it would explain certain logical inconsistencies in the parallel dimension interpretation, particularly regarding why the dimension mirrored Hawkins so precisely. However, the nuclear future theory faced significant contradictions when examined against canonical information. The show explicitly depicted Dimension X existing before 1983, before nuclear catastrophe could have occurred. Henry Creel spent 4 years in that realm from 1979 onwards. Unless time functioned non-linearly, with future existing simultaneously with past, the nuclear wasteland couldn't be Hawkins' future if it already existed in Hawkins' present. Additionally, certain elements of the Upside Down defied nuclear explanation. The vines that spread throughout the dimension, connecting through organic networks and responding to threats, demonstrated behaviors incompatible with irradiated plant matter. The telepathic control Henry Creel exerted over creatures suggested supernatural rather than scientific origins. The dimension's responsiveness to human thought and emotion, evidenced by manifestations like castle buyers appearing in response to Will's needs, indicated consciousness or magic beyond mutated biology. Nevertheless, the nuclear theory persisted in fan discussions, adapted and refined to address contradictions. Some versions proposed that the nuclear event occurred in a parallel timeline, creating an alternate Hawkins that somehow merged with Dimension X. Others suggested the dimension existed outside conventional time, making past and future meaningless designations. A few theorists even proposed the show might reveal multiple upside downs, with different versions reflecting different potential futures. A distinctly different interpretation focused on psychological rather than physical mechanisms. This theory proposed the upside down existed as a psychic projection, a physical manifestation of trauma, fear, and suppressed emotion, given form through supernatural power. The show established precedent for psychological states affecting physical reality. Eleven's powers responded to her emotional condition, growing stronger with anger or fear, weakening during periods of doubt or exhaustion. Her most impressive feats occurred when protecting people she loved or defending herself against threats. Emotional intensity directly influenced psychic capability throughout the series' depiction of supernatural abilities. The psychic projection theory suggested that the upside down functioned as collective manifestation of Hawkins' accumulated darkness. Every terrible thing that had occurred in the town, every moment of suffering, every drop of blood spilled, would contribute to creating a shadow world reflecting that accumulated trauma. The dimension wouldn't be separate from Hawkins, but rather an externalization of the town's psychological underbelly, made physical through supernatural means. This interpretation drew heavily from literary traditions of psychological horror, where monsters represented internal demons given external form. The dimension's darkness would literalize psychological darkness. Its toxicity would manifest emotional toxicity. The monsters hunting within would embody specific fears and traumas experienced by Hawkins' residents. The Demogorgon represented fear of the unknown and unseen. The Mind Flayer embodied loss of autonomy and identity. Vecna personified guilt and trauma from past mistakes. Dr. Sam Owen's description of the upside down spreading through Hawkins supported this reading. In Season 2, he explained to Joyce that the dimensional contamination functioned like a cancer, growing and metastasizing unless confronted and removed. Cancer as metaphor traditionally represented psychological issues left untreated, allowed to grow until they consumed everything healthy. The comparison suggested the upside down wasn't merely invading Hawkins, but emerging from within it. The theory gained particular traction when considering Eleven and Will's specific roles. Both children had endured severe trauma. Eleven had been subjected to Dr. Brenner's experiments from infancy, trained through psychological manipulation and occasionally torture, forced to use her abilities for purposes she didn't understand. She'd witnessed the massacre of her fellow test subjects, been manipulated into believing she'd caused their deaths, lived in isolation and fear for most of her existence. Will's trauma, while differently sourced, carried comparable weight. His father had abandoned the family, leaving emotional scars Will carried into adolescence. He'd been bullied extensively for being perceived as different. His week in the Upside Down represented the most extreme trauma imaginable for a child. Possession by the Mind Flayer had violated his bodily autonomy and sense of self. His emerging awareness of his sexuality in a time and place where such feelings required hiding added another layer of suppressed emotion. Together, Eleven and Will had experienced more psychological damage than any other characters, if their combined trauma somehow manifested physically through their psychic abilities. The Upside Down's existence would make terrible sense. It would be their pain given form, their fears made real, their suppressed emotions erupting into dimensions. This reading suggested the only way to destroy the Upside Down would involve not physical combat, but psychological healing. The characters would need to confront their traumas, process their pain, achieve emotional resolution. Only by healing the psychological wounds that created the shadow dimension could they eliminate its physical manifestation. The final battle wouldn't be fought with weapons, but with acceptance, forgiveness, and love. Perhaps most significantly, this interpretation aligned with the show's consistent thematic emphasis on emotional connections as source of strength. Eleven's powers worked best when protecting friends. Will survived through thinking of his mother's love. The group's bonds repeatedly saved them from threats that should have killed them. If the show's ultimate message centered on emotional health and human connection triumphing over darkness, having that darkness literally created by unprocessed trauma would provide thematically coherent resolution. Yet another theory focused specifically on Henry Creel's role as architect of the Dimension's current form. While he hadn't created the original Dimension X, his 4 years of isolation there from 1979 to 1983 provided ample time to reshape it according to his vision and needs. Henry had demonstrated reality-altering abilities even before his banishment. As a child in 1959, his powers had manifested through seemingly impossible acts. He'd manipulated time itself, freezing clocks. He'd killed his mother and sister through psychic attack while making it appear as if his father Victor had committed the murders. His abilities exceeded anything shown by other characters, including Eleven, suggesting he operated on a different level of psychic capability. In Dimension X, without Dr. Brenner's suppressant chip limiting his powers, Henry had developed even further. He'd encountered the native Mind Flayer entity, and rather than succumbing to it, he'd dominated it. The show depicted this through a sequence where shadowy particles responded to Henry's hand movements, swirling into patterns he directed, ultimately forming the distinctive spider shape that would terrorize Hawkins. He had literally sculpted an ancient entity into his weapon. If Henry could reshape the Mind Flayer, he could certainly manipulate Dimension X's environment. The theory proposed that when he sensed Eleven opening a gate to Hawkins in 1983, he'd seized the opportunity to create his invasion staging ground. Drawing on Hawkins' layout, which he knew intimately from his childhood there before his imprisonment at Hawkins' laboratory, He'd reconstructed the town within Dimension X. Every street, every building, every detail replicated with precision because he'd walked those streets, lived in that town, knew its geography personally. This reconstruction served strategic purposes. By creating a mirror Hawkins, Henry established perfect reconnaissance. He could study the town without being present, watching through the dimensional barrier, planning his eventual revenge against those who'd imprisoned him and the world that had failed to understand his superiority. The upside-down version became his war room and fortress simultaneously. Additionally, the mirror town provided psychological warfare opportunities. Victims dragged into the upside down would see familiar surroundings rendered horrific, a perversion of home that would inflict maximum psychological damage. Barbara Holland died in a nightmare version of the library. Will Byers hid in a corrupted Castle Byers. When characters eventually entered the upside down to fight, they'd be fighting on terrain that looked like home, but functioned as enemy territory, creating disorientation and emotional distress. The grandfather clock that Vecna used as his calling card supported this interpretation. In the real world, a grandfather clock stood in the Creel house from Henry's childhood. In the upside down, this same clock appeared to his victims as herald of their doom. Henry had taken an object from his past and weaponized it, transforming childhood memory into instrument of death. If he could do this with a clock, he could certainly do it with an entire town. Furthermore, fan theories suggested the clock served functions beyond symbolism. Some proposed it allowed Henry to manipulate time, enabling him to see both past and future with clarity. This would explain his apparent omniscience, his confident pronouncements that resistance was futile, his ability to show Nancy visions of events that hadn't yet occurred. The clock wasn't merely aesthetic choice, but actual mechanism for temporal manipulation. The upside down, as Henry's deliberate creation, positioned him as the show's true architect of horror. Every terrible thing that emerged from that dimension would trace back to his conscious choices and designs. He wasn't simply an inhabitant or ruler, but the dimension's active shaper, its artist working in medium of decay and death. This reading elevated Henry's villainy to near godlike status. He hadn't just found power in another dimension. He'd created an entire realm dedicated to his vision of the world remade according to his philosophy. Every vine, every monster, every corrupted structure would be his deliberate work, evidence of his ability to reshape reality itself when freed from human world limitations. Yet even within this interpretation, questions persisted. If Henry had created the Hawkins mirror, why did it freeze on November 6, 1983? That date held significance for Will's arrival, not for Henry's plans. If Henry controlled every aspect of the dimension, shouldn't he be able to update the mirror to reflect Hawkins' current state, rather than maintaining a 4-year-old snapshot? The frozen timeline suggested limitations to Henry's control, or perhaps indicated that forces beyond his command had shaped certain elements. The temporal freezing remained the Upside Down's most stubborn mystery, regardless of which origin theory one embraced. Nancy Wheeler's discovery of this phenomenon in Season 4 had sent shockwaves through both the characters and the audience. While investigating the upside-down version of her own house, she'd found her bedroom exactly as it had been in 1983, complete with a poster she'd removed years ago and diary entries ending on November 6th. 3 possible explanations emerged from this revelation. The first suggested 11's gate opening on that date had created the snapshot effect. Her psychic connection to the Demogorgon, the unprecedented power surge involved in tearing open reality itself, might have frozen the replication at that specific moment. The dimension had copied Hawkins as it existed when the bridge between worlds formed, and something about that process locked the copy permanently. The second explanation centered on Will Byers' arrival on that same date. If Will possessed unconscious reality-shaping abilities, as other theories proposed, his entrance into Dimension X might have triggered the copying and the freezing simultaneously. His desperate psychic projection of Hawkins, made in moment of extreme trauma, would have lacked the sophistication to include ongoing updates. He'd captured a single moment because that's all his untrained mind could manage. The third possibility involved Henry Creel's strategic choice. Perhaps he'd deliberately frozen the mirror on November 6, 1983, for purposes not yet clear. The date marked the beginning of his plan's active phase, when the gate opened and real invasion became possible. Freezing Hawkins at that moment might serve symbolic importance in his worldview or practical advantage in his schemes. Each explanation found support in the show's established mythology. Each had logical consistency, yet none had received canonical confirmation, leaving the mystery tantalizingly unsolved heading into the final season. The Duffer Brothers had addressed this speculation directly in interviews preceding Season 5's production. Ross Duffer acknowledged in conversation with Variety that they'd been aware of fan theories about the Upside Down's origin since Season 1. Every season would be like, "Should we talk about it?" And we'd go, "No, let's wait," he explained. And then finally we're like, "Well, we have to now." The confirmation that Season 5 would definitively explain the Upside Down's nature carried both promise and pressure. Fans had theorized for 8 years, building elaborate explanations that accounted for every observed detail. Any official answer would satisfy some while disappointing others. The creators faced the unenviable task of resolving television's most debated mystery in a manner that felt both surprising and inevitable, unexpected yet foreshadowed. Matt Duffer added that the ending had been planned for years, that the core conclusion hadn't required strain to develop. There were elements of it that were discussed for weeks, but the core idea of the ending we had for a really long time, he said. The brothers expressed confidence in their resolution, while acknowledging anxiety about its reception. Whatever the Upside Down truly was, its invasion of Hawkins in Season 4's finale brought dimensional questions into immediate, terrifying focus. The theories would soon face their ultimate test: the realm of shadow and decay, whether parallel dimension, post-apocalyptic future, psychic manifestation, or Henry Creel's deliberate creation had begun merging with the human world. Gates no longer existed as isolated tiers, but as massive rifts spreading across Hawkins like cracks in breaking glass. As the Upside Down bled into reality, another darkness approached. This one wore the face of someone beloved. Episode 2 of Stranger Things. Season 5 bore a title both revealing and concealed: The Vanishing of Blank Wheeler. Netflix's November 2024 announcement of Season 5's 8 episode titles provided fans their first substantial information about the final chapter's structure and content. Most titles followed conventional patterns: The Crawl, The Turnbow Trap, Sorcerer, The Bridge, Shock Therapy, The Right Side Up. Each suggested plot developments and thematic elements that fueled speculation across social media platforms and forum discussions. But Episode 2's title stood apart. Where other titles appeared complete, this one contained a deliberate gap. The streaming service had redacted a name, replacing it with a blank space that invited endless theorizing about which Wheeler family member would vanish in the season's early moments. The choice to reveal partial information demonstrated sophisticated audience engagement. Complete secrecy would have preserved surprise but generated less discussion. Full disclosure would have eliminated suspense. The redacted title occupied perfect middle ground, confirming that a vanishing would occur while concealing the victim's identity. Fans immediately began assembling evidence supporting various candidates, parsing trailer footage frame by frame, analysing set photographs for clues, constructing elaborate arguments for each possibility. 3 Wheeler family members emerged as primary suspects. Mike Wheeler, whose relationship with Eleven positioned him as emotionally central to the narrative. Nancy Wheeler, who'd come closest to Vecna in Season 4's climactic battle, and Holly Wheeler, the youngest sibling whose innocence and vulnerability made her simultaneously unlikely and devastatingly probable. The title structure itself provided initial clue through deliberate parallel to the show's origin. Stranger Things began with the vanishing of Will Byers, the pilot episode that established the series' core, mystery and emotional foundation. A child disappeared. His friends and family searched desperately. The quest to find him revealed supernatural horrors lurking beneath small-town normality. Everything that followed traced back to that first vanishing, that initial tear in reality's fabric. The Duffer Brothers had stated in multiple interviews that Season 5 would return to the show's roots, revisiting themes and structures from Season 1 while bringing the narrative full circle. An episode titled The Vanishing of Blank Wheeler fulfilled this promise explicitly. The series that opened with a child's disappearance would approach its conclusion with another, echoing its beginning, while demonstrating how far the characters had travelled from that innocent starting point. This structural parallel suggested that solving the Wheeler vanishing would prove as central to Season 5's plot as finding Will had been to Season 1's. The missing Wheeler, whoever they proved to be, would likely drive the season's early narrative momentum, uniting characters in common purpose while revealing crucial information about Vecna's plans and the Upside Down's continued invasion. Nancy Wheeler had received the most explicit foreshadowing for tragic fate. In Season 4's 7th episode, during her investigation of the Creel house in the Upside Down, Vecna had captured her in his psychic grip. Rather than killing her immediately, as he'd done with previous victims, he'd shown her visions. Not just memories of his own past and transformation, but glimpses of potential futures, possible outcomes, warnings or prophecies depending on interpretation. Nancy described what she'd witnessed to her friends after escaping Vecna's mental trap. He showed me things that haven't happened yet, the most awful things. I saw a dark cloud spreading over Hawkins, downtown on fire, dead soldiers, and this giant creature with a gaping mouth. And this creature wasn't alone. There were so many monsters, an army, and they were coming into Hawkins, into our neighbourhoods, our homes. And then he showed me my mum and Holly, Mike, and they were all... She couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Everyone she loved would die. The vision had included her entire family specifically. Not just generalised destruction of Hawkins, but targeted images of the Wheeler household destroyed, her loved ones killed. Vecna had personalised his prophecy, ensuring Nancy understood that people she cared about would suffer. Whether this represented inevitable future or psychological warfare designed to break her spirit remained ambiguous. Throughout Season 4's remaining episodes, this vision haunted Nancy visibly. She carried the burden of foreknowledge, aware that something terrible approached but uncertain whether her actions could prevent or merely postpone the prophesied destruction. The season concluded with the early stages of the vision manifesting. The dark cloud had begun spreading. Gates opened across Hawkins. The Upside Down's invasion had commenced. Season 5's trailer footage included a brief but devastating shot of Nancy standing at a sink, washing blood from her hands while crying. The scene's context remained unclear. Whose blood covered her hands? Had she killed someone in self-defense? Had she held someone dying? The image suggested trauma and loss, supporting theories that the vision would continue manifesting, that her family indeed faced mortal danger. Nancy herself represented a possible vanishing victim through logic of dramatic irony. She'd seen her family's destruction. She'd fought desperately to prevent it. What crueler twist could the narrative provide than having Nancy vanish while trying to save the very people she'd witnessed dying? Her disappearance would devastate Mike and Holly while leaving them without the sibling who'd been working hardest to protect them. Additionally, Nancy's extensive interaction with Vecna in Season 4 established a connection the villain might exploit. He'd been inside her mind, seen her memories, understood her psychological vulnerabilities. This psychic contact could provide him access to capture her again, dragging her back into his mental domain, or perhaps into the Upside Down itself for purposes yet unclear. Mike Wheeler carried different symbolic weight as potential vanishing victim. His relationship with Eleven formed the show's emotional core, a love story that had developed across 4 seasons, from childhood infatuation into genuine partnership. Eleven's powers responded to her feelings about Mike, growing stronger when she believed in his love, faltering when she doubted. If Vecna sought to weaken Eleven before their final confrontation, targeting Mike would accomplish this efficiently. The trailer footage provided no clear evidence of Mike's fate, which some theorists interpreted as suspicious absence. Major characters typically appeared prominently in promotional materials. Mike's relative scarcity in the Season 5 teaser suggested either deliberate concealment or reduced screen time. If he vanished early in the season, his minimal trailer presence would make sense as strategy to avoid spoiling this development. Moreover, Mike's importance to multiple characters beyond 11 created extensive dramatic potential for his disappearance. Will Byers harboured feelings for Mike that he'd never fully expressed, making Mike's vanishing personally devastating beyond friendship bonds. Dustin and Lucas would lose the friend who'd been their party leader since childhood. Nancy would face the nightmare of her little brother disappearing just as Will had years before, history repeating in cruelest fashion. Mike vanishing would also parallel Will's Season 1 disappearance in terms of character type. Both boys were younger members of the friend group, players in their ongoing Dungeons & Dragons campaign, children rather than the emerging adults that Nancy and Jonathan represented. Having Mike taken would recreate the dynamic of searching for a vulnerable party member while raising stakes through accumulated relationships and history. However, set photographs from Season 5's production had shown Finn Wolfhard, who portrayed Mike, filming scenes that appeared to occur later in the season based on costume continuity and location. Unless these photographs depicted flashbacks or misdirection through carefully staged false shoots, Mike would survive at least into the season's middle episodes. This evidence weakened the Mike vanishing theory without eliminating it entirely. Holly Wheeler emerged as the candidate with strongest evidentiary support, despite initial seeming improbability. The youngest Wheeler child had existed as background presence through most of the series, too young to participate in supernatural adventures, protected by her parents' ignorance of the true dangers threatening Hawkins. Season 4's conclusion had shown her at the window of the Wheeler home, watching spores from the Upside Down falling like snow while calling for her mother. Karen Wheeler's expression in that moment had shifted from maternal patience to primal dread, suggesting instinctive recognition that something was terribly wrong. Season 5's promotional materials and leaked production information pointed repeatedly toward Holly's increased importance. The show had recast the role with Nell Fisher, an older actress who could handle more substantial scenes and emotional demands. Previous seasons had cast Holly with twins who appeared primarily in domestic tableaus, adorable, but largely non-essential to plot. Aging up the character and casting a more experienced child actress indicated plans for significant story involvement. Set photographs captured during filming showed scenes that seemed to confirm Holly's centrality to Season 5's horror. One image depicted Vecna in his human form, Henry Creel as he'd appeared before his transformation, standing near a young girl matching Holly's appearance. The scene's context remained speculative, but it suggested Vecna making contact with Holly through dreams or visions. His preferred method for selecting and grooming victims before striking. Vecna's pattern across Season 4 had involved targeting teenagers dealing with trauma, guilt, or psychological wounds he could exploit. He'd shown his victims their worst memories and deepest fears before killing them. Holly, at age 5 or 6 depending on the timeline, wouldn't process trauma in ways that fit his established methodology. Her youth created different vulnerability. She couldn't comprehend the danger she faced. She lacked defences that older victims might erect through skepticism or emotional walls. Moreover, Holly's innocence made her the perfect target for psychological warfare against Nancy and Mike. Vecna had shown Nancy her family dying. What better way to fulfill that prophecy than by taking Holly first, forcing Nancy and Mike to confront their failure to protect their youngest sibling? The guilt and anguish would weaken them emotionally before the final battle, exactly as Vecna had weakened Max in Season 4 before attempting to kill her. The third episode's title, The Turnbow Trap, suggested complications in any rescue attempt. Set reports had identified Derek Turnbow as a new character appearing in Season 5, with behind-the-scenes photographs showing an actor seemingly floating or suspended in air. Fan theories proposed that Vecna might use Derek as hostage or bait, forcing the heroes to make impossible choices. If Holly had vanished and Derek's fate was connected, the heroes might face the trap of choosing between two victims when they could only save one. Strategic analysis of Vecna's goals supported the Holly theory through simple tactical logic. Taking Mike would hurt Eleven, but leave Nancy free to act. Taking Nancy would wound Mike, but eliminate a threat who'd nearly destroyed Vecna's physical form in Season 4's battle. Taking Holly would devastate both older siblings equally while removing someone who posed no direct threat to Vecna's plans. The cruelty was precise. The youngest, most innocent member of a family that had been integral to resisting him would be taken precisely because of her innocence and youth. Additionally, Holly's vanishing would complete the thematic circle in ways Mike's or Nancy's wouldn't. Will Byers, the first victim, had been 12 years old, a child on the cusp of adolescence, but still fundamentally young and vulnerable. Holly represented even more extreme vulnerability, a kindergarten-age child with no understanding of the supernatural forces that had haunted Hawkins for years. Her vanishing would demonstrate that Vecna's evil had no limits, no line he wouldn't cross, no victim too young for his purposes. The Kate Bush song that had saved Max in Season 4, Running Up That Hill, contained lyrics about making deals with God to swap places with someone else. If Holly vanished, Nancy might desperately wish to trade places with her little sister, to be the one taken instead. Mike might volunteer to vanish if it meant Holly's safe return. The emotional mathematics of who should suffer and who deserved protection would torture characters already dealing with survivors' guilt and accumulated trauma. Karen and Ted Wheeler, the parents who'd remained largely oblivious to supernatural events, would be forced to confront the truth they'd avoided. Their youngest child's disappearance couldn't be explained through conventional means. They'd have to accept that the strange events in Hawkins were real, that the danger to their family was existential, that their older children had been fighting horrors beyond imagination while they maintained facade of suburban normality. The vanishing's timing in Episode 2 suggested rapid escalation. Season 1 had devoted most of its running time to searching for Will, building mystery around his location and condition. Season 5 couldn't afford such extended focus on a single plot thread when it needed to resolve multiple storylines and bring the series to conclusion. A vanishing in the second episode would establish immediate stakes while leaving 6 episodes to address it alongside other narrative threads, including defeating Vecna, closing the gates permanently, resolving Eleven's arc, and providing emotional closure for beloved characters. Fan communities remained divided about which Wheeler would vanish, with passionate arguments supporting each candidate. Nancy's advocates cited her vision and her prominent role in Vecna's Season 4 defeat as narrative setup for her capture or death. Mike's supporters pointed to the emotional impact his disappearance would create and the potential for parallel structure with Will's Season 1 abduction. Holly's theorists assembled evidence from casting changes, set photographs, and strategic analysis of Vecna's patterns. Some observers proposed that the redacted name might not be Wheeler at all, that the gap concealed different information entirely. Perhaps the episode title read, "The Vanishing of the Wheelers," plural, suggesting multiple family members taken simultaneously. Perhaps the blank represented a descriptor rather than a first name, the vanishing of the Wheeler family. Such interpretations, while less supported by available evidence, demonstrated the breadth of speculation the redacted title had generated. The Wheeler family, whose basement had hosted Dungeons and Dragons campaigns and whose dinner table had gathered friends, stood at prophecy's edge. Someone would fill that blank space, someone would vanish into darkness that had claimed Will Byers years before. The difference was that this time, the characters understood what they faced. They'd fought these battles before. They knew the true nature of the threat, yet knowledge hadn't prevented previous tragedies. Understanding the Upside Down's existence hadn't saved Barbara Holland. Knowing about the Mind Flayer hadn't prevented Billy Hargrove's possession and death. Awareness of Vecna's methods hadn't stopped him from killing multiple teenagers and leaving Max in a coma between life and death. Information alone provided insufficient protection against evil that operated through both physical and psychic domains. The vanishing would occur. The title confirmed it. The only questions involved identity, circumstances, and whether rescue would prove possible before whatever Vecna planned for his victim came to fruition. November 2025 would bring answers that fans had debated since the episode titles were revealed, confirmation of theories or revelation of possibilities no one had considered. While one beloved character faced disappearance, another remained trapped between dimensions, her fate uncertain and potentially horrifying. Max Mayfield died on March 27, 1986. Her heart stopped. Vecna claimed his fourth victim. Then 11 reached into death itself and pulled her back. The sequence of events in Season 4's finale unfolded with devastating precision. Max had volunteered as bait, allowing Vecna to begin his psychic attack on her, while Steve Harrington, Nancy Wheeler, and Robin Buckley assaulted his physical body in the Upside Down. The plan required extraordinary courage from Max, who knew she was inviting the monster that had already shown her visions of her own death into her mind. She accepted this risk to give her friends their chance at stopping him. The attack progressed exactly as Vecna intended. He showed Max the death of her stepbrother Billy, whom she'd watched die in the Battle of Starcourt Mall the previous summer. He weaponized her guilt over their complicated relationship, over the times she'd wished him dead before she'd understood the abuse he suffered, over her failure to save him when the Mind Flayer used him as vessel. The psychological torture preceded the physical assault as Vecna methodically broke down Max's mental defenses. Lucas Sinclair witnessed her suffering from mere feet away, helpless to intervene in a battle occurring within Max's mind. He held her hand. He played Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill on a portable cassette player, the song that had saved Max from Vecna once before. But this time, the music couldn't reach her. Vecna's grip had tightened too far. Max's bones began breaking. Her limbs twisted at unnatural angles as Vecna's curse manifested physically, snapping her skeleton with sounds Lucas would carry in nightmares forever. Her eyes bled, tears of crimson streaming down her face. She rose into the air, suspended by invisible force while her body shattered. Lucas screamed her name, desperate and useless. Then she fell. Lucas caught her broken body, cradling her in his arms while blood pooled beneath them. Max whispered final words with her remaining strength. "I'm not ready to die. I'm not ready." Her voice carried the terror of someone feeling life slip away, despite desperate desire to stay. She'd survived poverty, an abusive household, her mother's alcoholism, Billy's death, and relocation to a town that seemed cursed. She'd fought so hard to keep existing, despite depression that had nearly swallowed her whole. Now, at 15 years old, death was taking her anyway. Her eyes went blank. Her body went limp. Her heart stopped beating. At that precise moment, Vecna's fourth gate opened. The requirement for his plan had been 4 deaths, 4 sacrifices to create the pattern he needed to tear Hawkins apart and merge dimensions permanently. Max's death, even lasting only moments, satisfied this requirement. The ground split beneath the town in massive rifts that would eventually connect, releasing the Upside Down into the human world like poison into bloodstream. But 11 had other intentions, monitoring the situation from a bath of salt water that allowed her psychic projection across distances. She'd felt Max's death, the connection between them, forged through shared trauma and mutual respect, resonated with that final moment. 11 refused to accept it. She dove into whatever space existed beyond life, following the thread that had been Max's consciousness. The show provided no clear explanation of where 11 went or what she did there. Viewers saw only her face contorted with effort, blood streaming from her nose, determination absolute. She found something. She grasped it. She dragged it back. Max's heart restarted. Lucas felt the pulse return beneath his fingers, weak but present. Max's chest rose with breath. Colour returned to her skin. The physical injuries remained catastrophic. Every bone that had broken stayed broken. The bleeding continued, but she lived. Emergency services transported Max to Hawkins Memorial Hospital, where she underwent surgery for injuries that should have killed her. Doctors marvelled at her survival while remaining grimly uncertain about her prognosis. The physical trauma was severe, but potentially survivable with time and treatment. The neurological status presented more concerning picture. Max didn't wake up. Days passed, then weeks. Her body healed at rates that exceeded medical expectations, possibly aided by whatever supernatural forces had been involved in her resurrection. Broken bones mended, internal bleeding stopped, surgical incisions closed cleanly. Her physical form recovered, but her consciousness didn't return. She remained in what doctors classified as persistent coma, technically alive but unresponsive to external stimuli. Brain activity continued at levels indicating she wasn't brain dead, yet she showed no awareness of her surroundings, no response to voices or touch, no sign that anyone existed inside the healed shell of her body. 11 attempted to reach Max through psychic means, entering her mind the way she'd entered countless others across 4 seasons of supernatural adventure. What she found terrified her into silence that communicated more than words could have. Max's mind was empty, not damaged or fragmented, but completely void. Consciousness had departed, leaving nothing behind. The girl who'd been Max Mayfield no longer resided in her own skull. This state persisted through the 2-day time jump that concluded Season 4, with Lucas maintaining vigil at Max's bedside, while Hawkins descended into chaos around them. The rifts had widened. The Upside Down's influence spread visibly through the town. Refugees fled, while others arrived to help with disaster response. In the hospital, Lucas held Max's unresponsive hand and wept. Season 5's trailer footage showed this situation continuing. Lucas appeared in hospital scenes, still at Max's bedside, his face showing the accumulated exhaustion of someone who'd been keeping watch for extended periods. Another shot depicted him carrying Max's unconscious form through hospital corridors while demodogs approached, suggesting the hospital itself would come under attack, forcing desperate evacuation of a patient in no condition to be moved. The visual reference to Jurassic Park was deliberate, with Lucas and Max hiding behind furniture exactly as characters in that film had hidden from velociraptors hunting through a visitor center. The scene promised tension and terror, a chase sequence where Lucas would need to protect someone who couldn't protect herself, evading monsters while burdened with an unconscious body. Survival would require luck and help, factors not guaranteed in Stranger Things' increasingly brutal narrative. But the truly disturbing theory about Max's fate extended beyond her continued coma or physical danger from monster attacks. It concerned the question of where her consciousness had gone and what might return in its place. Henry Creel had spoken specific words in Season 4's 7th episode, during the flashback showing Eleven's discovery of the massacre at Hawkins' laboratory. After young Henry had killed all the other children in Dr. Brenner's program, young Eleven had found their bodies in the Rainbow Room. She'd wept over her fallen siblings, believing herself responsible because Henry had framed her for the murders. Henry had approached her gently, speaking with what sounded like compassion but carried darker implications. "They're not gone, 11, he'd said, tapping his temple with one finger. "They are right here with me." The statement's meaning had seemed metaphorical at first hearing. Henry remembered the children he'd killed. They lived in his memories, but repeated viewings and analysis suggested something more literal. Henry had consumed their consciousnesses when he killed them, absorbing their identities into his own mind. They existed within him, not as memories, but as captured prisoners, aware but trapped, experiencing his thoughts and actions without ability to influence or escape. This revelation recontextualized Vecna's entire methodology. He didn't simply kill his victims, he collected them. Every teenager he'd murdered in Season 4, Chrissy Cunningham, Fred Benson, Patrick McKinney, they hadn't found peaceful oblivion in death. They remained conscious within Vecna's mind, experiencing the horror of imprisonment in the thoughts of their murderer. Vecna carried his victims the way a spider carried prey wrapped in web, preserved and helpless. Max's momentary death had completed Vecna's ritual, despite Eleven's intervention. His 4 gates had opened, his plan had advanced, but the theory proposed that Max herself hadn't fully returned from death because Vecna had claimed her during that crucial moment when her heart had stopped. Her consciousness now resided within his mind alongside the other victims he'd collected. The empty void 11 had encountered when psychically entering Max's mind made terrible sense if Max simply wasn't there anymore. Her body lived, maintained through 11's desperate rescue and medical intervention. But the essential self that made Max who she was, her personality, memories, sense of identity, everything that constituted consciousness, had been separated from that body and imprisoned elsewhere. She existed as a ghost haunting Vecna's thoughts, aware but unable to communicate, watching through his perspective as he continued his campaign against Hawkins and prepared for final confrontation with 11. This imprisonment represented torture beyond physical pain. Max would experience Vecna's thoughts, feel his emotions, witness his plans while being absolutely powerless to warn anyone or resist in any way. She'd be forced to observe as he potentially hurt or killed her friends, using knowledge he'd extracted from her memories to target them more effectively. Her love for Lucas, her friendships with 11 and the others, everything she cared about would become weapons Vecna could employ against those she wanted to protect. The theory's most horrifying extension proposed that Max's empty body wouldn't remain empty. Vecna had demonstrated ability to possess humans through the Mind Flayer in Season 2 and Season 3. Will Byers had been possessed, used as spy, and eventually nearly consumed entirely. Billy Hargrove had been possessed, transformed into the Mind Flayer's instrument, until the original, Billy managed brief resurgence before death. The methodology was established. Consciousness could be suppressed or replaced, allowing hostile intelligence to pilot human bodies. With Max's consciousness trapped in Vecna's mind, her body provided perfect vessel for possession. Empty shells waited to be filled. The Mind Flayer, operating under Vecna's control, could occupy Max's form, using her face and voice to approach her friends without suspicion. Or Vecna himself might find way to split his attention, maintaining his primary form in the Upside Down, while simultaneously controlling Max's body in the human world. This scenario had precedent in the show's mythology and devastating potential for emotional destruction. Max possessed intimate knowledge of the group's dynamics, their hiding places, their relationships, and vulnerabilities. She knew Eleven's triggers and Lucas's protective instincts. She understood the layouts of their homes and the town's geography. A hostile intelligence wearing Max's face would wield all this information against its targets. Moreover, the cruelty of forcing the group to fight someone wearing their friend's body would inflict psychological damage, potentially exceeding physical threat. Lucas in particular would face impossible choices. How could he defend himself if Max attacked him? How could he harm the body of the girl he loved, even if something else controlled it? The paralysis induced by seeing Max as enemy might prove fatal. Reddit discussions of this theory conjured disturbing imagery, fans describing what possessed Max might look like. One post imagined her dressed in power suit with shoulder pads and elaborate hair styled like villains from 1980s soap operas, Vecna transforming her into his representative in the material world. The aesthetic would pervert Max's natural tomboyish style, forcing her into costume that represented everything she'd rejected about traditional femininity and social expectations. The Kate Bush song that had saved Max once would become source of additional torture if this theory proved accurate. Running Up That Hill's lyrics described a deal with God to swap positions with someone else, to experience what another person felt by literally exchanging bodies. Max, trapped in Vecna's consciousness, while Vecna controlled her body, would be precisely this exchange, rendered horrific rather than enlightening. The song that represented hope and salvation would become ironic commentary on her fate. Fighting possessed, Max would require 11 to confront her friend directly, possibly engaging in psychic battle that risked killing Max's body to destroy the intelligence controlling it. The parallel to 11's original confrontation with Henry Creel in the Rainbow Room would be explicit. She'd banished him to another dimension to save herself. Now she might need to kill her friend's body to save everyone else. The choice would destroy her emotionally, regardless of outcome. Some variations of the theory proposed that freeing Max would require 11 to enter Vecna's mind, journeying into his consciousness to locate and retrieve Max's imprisoned self. This quest would parallel rescue missions from earlier seasons, but with stakes elevated beyond physical danger. Entering Vecna's mind would expose 11 to his memories, his thoughts, his accumulated evil. The psychological contamination might prove permanent. Additionally, if multiple consciousnesses were imprisoned within Vecna, 11 would encounter all of them. The Hawkins Laboratory children from 1979, the Season 4 victims, possibly others taken throughout his long existence. Choosing to rescue Max might mean abandoning others, or facing impossible decisions about who deserved salvation when she could only save one consciousness before Vecna's mental defenses forced her out. The mechanics of returning Max's consciousness to her body remained unclear, even if 11 successfully retrieved her from Vecna's mind. The process of reinstalling consciousness into a body might prove impossible or dangerous. Max could return damaged, fragmented, traumatized, beyond healing by her time imprisoned in a monster's thoughts. Or she might return only to discover her body had been so thoroughly controlled by Vecna that it no longer fully belonged to her, that some psychic residue remained, making her continue to sense his presence and influence. Killing Vecna presented another complication. If his death resulted in the dissolution of his consciousness, everything trapped within would dissolve too. Max's only hope for survival might require keeping Vecna alive while finding some way to extract imprisoned minds, a scenario that would complicate the group's primary mission of destroying him permanently. They'd need to defeat him without killing him, subduing something nearly omnipotent long enough to perform psychic surgery of unprecedented complexity. The trailer's hospital scenes suggested Max's body would remain comatose through at least the season's early episodes. Lucas's ongoing vigil implied no change in her condition, no awakening that would resolve the situation quickly. The dramatic tension of her uncertain fate would stretch across multiple episodes, building toward revelation about where her consciousness truly resided and whether recovery was possible. Sadie Sink, the actress portraying Max, had given no interviews revealing Season 5's plot details. Her social media presence remained carefully neutral about her character's fate. This silence prevented any confirmation or denial of possession theories, leaving fans to construct elaborate interpretations based purely on narrative analysis and trailer examination. The theory's emotional resonance derived from Max's established character arc across seasons 2 through 4. She'd arrived in Hawkins as an angry, defensive outsider, new to town and resentful of circumstances that had brought her family there. Gradually, she'd opened to friendship with the group, particularly with Eleven and Lucas. She'd suffered Billy's death and struggled with depression severe enough that Vecna had nearly claimed her in Season 4's 4th episode, saved only by the power of music and Lucas's desperate message about why she deserved to live. Max had fought so hard to survive, to process grief, to maintain connections with people she cared about despite every instinct screaming at her to isolate and surrender to despair. Her journey had been about choosing life over death, connection over isolation, hope over cynicism. Having that hard-won survival negated through having her consciousness stolen and her body possessed would represent the cruelest possible fate for someone who'd already endured more than any teenager should face. Yet cruelty was precisely what Vecna specialized in. His entire methodology involved identifying people's psychological wounds and making them fatal. He found the guilt, the shame, the trauma, and he weaponized it. Max's greatest fear wasn't death itself, but the meaninglessness of her suffering, the possibility that all her pain had no purpose. Being trapped in Vecna's consciousness while he used her body against her friends would validate every worst thought she'd ever had about her own worthlessness. Lucas would bear witness to this horror, forced to watch the girl he loved transformed into weapon against everything she valued. His arc across 4 seasons had involved overcoming peer pressure to stay loyal to his friends, learning to balance social acceptance with genuine connection, and developing the courage to be vulnerable about his feelings. Max's possession would test all of that, demanding he remain loyal to her true self, even when confronting a distorted version wearing her face. The show's willingness to inflict trauma on its young characters had intensified with each season. Season 1 had involved danger, but ultimately returned most characters safely home. Season 2 had featured Will's possession, but his eventual rescue. Season 3 had killed Billy, but spared the core group. Season 4 had murdered multiple sympathetic teenagers and left Max in a coma. The escalating pattern suggested Season 5 might deliver the most devastating developments yet. Max Mayfield's story, which began with skateboarding into Hawkins and refusing to be another victim, might conclude with the most terrible victimization imaginable. Not death, which would at least provide ending and peace, but rather endless imprisonment, witnessing atrocities while her own form committed them. The girl who'd survived so much might finally face the one fate she couldn't endure. As theories spiraled toward darkness, one final possibility offered unexpected hope. The end might not be an ending at all, but a transformation. The 8th and final episode of Stranger Things bore a title that reversed everything. The Right Side Up. Netflix's revelation of Season 5's complete episode list in November 2024 had generated immediate analysis and speculation across fan communities. Each title suggested plot developments and thematic elements. The crawl implied movement through confined spaces, perhaps the characters navigating upside-down terrain or escaping through tunnels. Sorcerer referenced Dungeons and Dragons terminology, possibly indicating Will's importance as Will the Wise. Shock therapy suggested medical intervention, potentially involving 11 or Max. The bridge could be literal structure or metaphorical connection between dimensions. But the finale's title stood apart through its direct relationship to the show's central concept. The Upside Down had defined Stranger Things mythology from the first season. The name itself communicated the dimension's nature as inverted reflection of reality, a world turned literally upside down. The finale-bearing title that flipped this phrase suggested narrative and thematic inversion, transformation of fundamental elements, reversal of expectations about how the story would conclude. Immediate interpretation divided into two camps. Some fans read the right side up as signifying return to normalcy, the world restored to its proper orientation after years of dimensional chaos. The characters would close the gates permanently, defeat Vecna, eliminate the Upside Down's influence, and restore Hawkins to the right side up state it had occupied before November 1983. This reading promised happy ending where evil was vanquished and life returned to peaceful routine. Others interpreted the title more literally, suggesting it indicated actual transformation of the upside-down dimension, itself from realm of darkness into realm of light. The dimension wouldn't be destroyed or sealed away, but rather fundamentally altered, flipped from nightmare landscape into something else entirely. This interpretation sparked elaborate theories about how such transformation might occur and what it would mean for the show's mythology and characters. David Harbour, who portrayed Jim Hopper throughout the series, had described the finale in interviews as the best episode the Duffer Brothers had ever written. His enthusiasm suggested emotional weight and narrative satisfaction, though he carefully avoided specific plot details. The praise from someone who'd been with the show since its beginning and had read scripts for all 8 Season 5 episodes carried particular weight. Harbour's judgment that this represented the creative team's finest work implied they'd achieved something extraordinary in crafting the series' conclusion. The transformation theory gained traction through both symbolic analysis and practical consideration of the show's themes. Stranger Things had consistently emphasized that love, friendship, and human connection provided power exceeding physical strength or supernatural abilities. Eleven's greatest feats occurred when protecting people she cared about. The group survived impossible odds through loyalty and cooperation. Characters found courage through their bonds with others. This thematic foundation suggested the finale might demonstrate these principles at cosmic scale. If human connection could defeat individual monsters and close specific gates, perhaps it could transform an entire dimension. The mechanism would involve 11, whose psychic powers had opened the first gate and whose abilities exceeded anyone else's by substantial margin. She demonstrated capacity for extraordinary feats, including resurrection, as her saving of Max had proven. Transforming a dimension might be possible for someone whose powers operated at her level. The theory proposed that 11 would somehow take Vecna's place as ruler or controlling consciousness of the Upside Down. Henry Creel had shaped the dimension through his will, creating the Mind Flayer's form, directing its creatures, maintaining the corrupted Hawkins mirror. His consciousness dominated the realm completely. If 11 defeated him and assumed that dominant position, she could reshape the dimension according to her intentions rather than his. Her intentions would obviously differ from Henry's fundamentally. Where he had created realm of death and decay, reflecting his contempt for humanity and desire for control, 11 would create something reflecting her values of protection, connection, and hope. The upside down would transform from shadow dimension into what one Reddit user described as paradise, a realm of light and beauty rather than darkness and corruption. This transformation would literalize the show's core message about love conquering hate. The dimension that had terrorized Hawkins for years would become sanctuary, threat, converted into protection through the power of someone who'd suffered immensely but refused to let suffering define her. 11's journey from abused laboratory subject to hero who saved everyone would culminate in her remaking hell into heaven through sheer force of love and determination. The visual representation of this transformation would provide spectacular imagery. The decaying structures of upside-down Hawkins would bloom with colour and life. Dead trees would sprout leaves. The toxic atmosphere would clear, revealing sunlight instead of perpetual storm clouds. The vines that had spread corruption would transform into flowering plants. Buildings would repair themselves, restored to pristine condition rather than rotting versions. The dimension that had looked like nightmare would become dream. Beyond aesthetic transformation, the dimension's fundamental nature would shift from hostile to welcoming. The creatures that had hunted humans would become peaceful, or perhaps disappear entirely, replaced by benign entities. The psychic oppression that had weighed on everyone who entered would lift, replaced by sense of peace and safety. Gates between dimensions would no longer pose danger, but rather provide access to beautiful alternate realm instead of terrifying one. This transformation carried profound implications for characters who died throughout the series. If the Upside Down became paradise rather than hell, those whose consciousnesses were trapped there might find peace instead of torment. The children Henry Creel had killed in 1979 could exist in beautiful realm rather than imprisoned in Monster's mind. The teenagers Vecna had murdered in Season 4 would inhabit sanctuary instead of suffering endless psychological torture. More dramatically, the theory proposed that transformation might enable resurrection of characters whose deaths had devastated viewers. Barbara Holland, whose loss in Season 1 had never received adequate acknowledgement or justice. Bob Newby, the gentle man who'd loved Joyce and died saving others in Season 2. Billy Hargrove, whose redemptive sacrifice in Season 3 had complicated his legacy as abuser and victim both. Eddie Munson, the metalhead, whose heroic death in Season 4 had sparked widespread mourning and demands for his return. A transformed Upside Down, operating as Afterlife Dimension, could house all these lost characters, allowing survivors to visit them and achieve emotional closure. Nancy Wheeler could see Barbara again, finally receiving opportunity to apologize for failing to notice her friend's absence until too late. Joyce could thank Bob for his sacrifice and tell him she'd moved on, but would never forget him. Max could encounter Billy in state beyond his rage and pain, understanding him as human rather than monster. Dustin could reunite with Eddie, the older friend who'd inspired him and died protecting him. These reunions would provide extraordinary emotional payoff for viewers who'd mourned, alongside the characters. The deaths that had seemed permanent and final would gain different quality, not negated but transformed into transitions rather than endings. Characters wouldn't return to life in conventional sense, but they wouldn't be simply gone either. They'd exist in transformed dimension, accessible to loved ones who wish to connect with them. However, this resurrection possibility introduced profound question about cost. If 11 transformed the Upside Down into paradise, would she need to remain there to maintain it? Henry Creel's consciousness had dominated the dimension constantly, his will imposed on every aspect of its existence. He hadn't been able to leave his realm without losing control over it. The same limitation might apply to anyone who assumed his role. 11 might face ultimate heroic choice. She could save everyone, defeat Vecna, transform dimension of death into realm of life, but only by accepting permanent exile from the human world. She would become the Upside Down's guardian and consciousness, unable to return to Hawkins, separated forever from Mike Wheeler and the friends who'd become her family. The sacrifice would be absolute. Mike's reaction to this fate would devastate him and viewers both. Their love story had developed across 4 seasons, from childhood connection into genuine partnership. They'd overcome distance, misunderstanding, and supernatural chaos to remain together. Having 11 achieve ultimate victory, but lose ability to stay with Mike, would be simultaneously triumphant and tragic, success shadowed by loss. Some variations of the theory propose that Will Byers might join 11 in this role. His psychic connection to the Upside Down, his potential latent powers, his deep understanding of the dimension from having survived there, all positioned him as possible co-guardian. 2 consciousnesses working together might maintain transformed dimension more effectively than one alone. Will and 11 combining abilities could parallel the Dungeons and Dragons mathematics that suggested their partnership was necessary for victory. Will accepting this fate would complete his arc in poignant fashion. The boy who'd been taken first, who'd suffered most across 4 seasons, would choose to return to the dimension that had traumatized him. But this time, he'd return as guardian rather than victim, protector rather than prey. He'd transform the site of his worst nightmares into sanctuary for others. The choice would represent healing through reclamation of space that had hurt him. This scenario would also resolve Will's suppressed feelings for Mike in bittersweet manner. He'd loved Mike without hope of reciprocation, suffering silently while watching Mike's relationship with 11. If both Will and 11 ended up as co-guardians of transformed dimension, they'd be together eternally in partnership that transcended romance, united in purpose and power, even as they remained separated from those they loved in the human world. The sacrifice interpretation sparked intense debate within fan communities. Some viewers embraced it as fitting conclusion for characters who'd given so much already, arguing that true heroism sometimes required ultimate cost. Others rejected it as unnecessarily tragic, insisting that heroes deserved happiness after all they'd endured. The division reflected broader disagreement about what kind of ending the series deserved. Those favouring happy ending without sacrifice pointed to the finale's title as evidence. The right side up suggested restoration and reversal, returning everything to proper order. If the conclusion involved main characters exiled to alternate dimension, that wouldn't truly restore normalcy or flip things right side up. The title implied happy resolution, where threats were eliminated and life returned to joyful routine. Social media discussions captured this sentiment repeatedly. One ex-user posted that the title just confirms to me that Stranger Things 5 has a happy ending, interpreting it as promise of genuine triumph without accompanying tragedy. Fans expressed desire for the characters to survive together, to get the peaceful lives they'd fought for across 8 years of storytelling. After so much suffering and loss, the series owed them uncomplicated victory. Others argued that Stranger Things had never provided uncomplicated anything. Every season had mixed triumph with tragedy. Season 1 saved Will but cost 11 her temporary presence and Barbara her life. Season 2 closed the gate but traumatized Will through possession. Season 3 defeated the Mind Flayer but killed Billy and forced the Byers family to leave Hawkins. Season 4 seriously wounded Vecna but left Max in coma and multiple teenagers dead. The pattern suggested Season 5 would follow similar trajectory, achieving victory but extracting terrible price. The Duffer Brothers' storytelling history supported expectations of bittersweet conclusions. They demonstrated willingness to inflict real consequences on characters, to make heroism cost something substantial. Their influences ranged from Stephen King novels to 1980s films like E.T. and The Goonies, works that combined wonder with genuine danger, friendship with loss, triumph with melancholy. A finale that leaned into bittersweetness would align with these traditions. Moreover, certain narrative elements seem to demand significant sacrifice. Vecna's power approached godlike levels. Defeating him through conventional combat seemed implausible, given how thoroughly he'd survived previous attempts to destroy him. Nancy, Robin, and Steve had set him on fire and shot him repeatedly in Season 4's climax. He'd fallen from a window 2 stories high. His body had been ravaged and broken. Yet he'd survived, crawling away to heal and prepare for Season 5, killing something that resilience might require sacrifice beyond normal combat. A distinctly different theory drew parallels to Netflix's other major time manipulation series, Dark. That show's complex temporal mechanics had involved characters discovering they existed within bootstrap paradoxes and causal loops where effect preceded cause. The apocalypse they tried to prevent had actually been caused by their attempts to prevent it. Resolution required accepting that certain events were inevitable and finding ways to work within that inevitability rather than fighting it. Some Stranger Things theorists proposed similar temporal mechanics might be at play. What if the Upside Down existed as post-apocalyptic Hawkins from the future, and all the dimensional rifts were actually tears in time rather than space? Characters would be glimpsing and inadvertently causing their own future devastation. The only way to prevent apocalypse would be understanding this temporal loop and either accepting it or finding the moment where intervention could break the cycle. This interpretation would explain certain persistent mysteries. The Upside Down being frozen on November 6, 1983 could indicate that date as the moment when time broke, creating loop that needed to be closed. The dimension's appearance as nuclear wasteland would represent future Hawkins after catastrophic war or accident. The monsters would be mutated survivors rather than interdimensional creatures. 11 transforming the Upside Down could then represent her changing the future rather than converting alternate dimension. By altering outcomes in the present, she'd prevent the apocalyptic timeline from occurring, effectively creating new future where Hawkins survived. The right side up would indicate restored temporal progression rather than spatial transformation, time flowing correctly again after years of loop-induced chaos. This theory's complexity appealed to fans who'd enjoyed Dark's intricate plotting and philosophical depth. Stranger Things, incorporating time travel elements in its final season, would elevate the science fiction aspects beyond simple dimensional portals. It would recontextualize the entire series as time travel story disguised as alternate dimension horror, a revelation that would reward rewatching with new interpretive framework. However, the time loop theory faced significant obstacles. The show had consistently presented the Upside Down as spatial rather than temporal phenomenon. Characters could see the current state of affairs in the human world while in the Upside Down, suggesting simultaneity rather than different time periods. The mechanics of transforming time travel into the narrative this late would require extensive exposition that might feel forced or unsatisfying. Additionally, certain fans expressed dread at one particular meta-narrative possibility. What if the entire series was revealed to have been an extended Dungeons & Dragons campaign, with the final scene showing the characters concluding their game in Mike's basement? This twist would retroactively reframe every supernatural element as imagination rather than diegetic reality within the show's world. The "it was all a game" reveal represented nightmare scenario for many viewers who'd invested emotionally in characters and their struggles. Reducing everything to fantasy game would invalidate the stakes, suggest that nothing mattered because nothing was real, even within the fictional framework. Deaths wouldn't be genuine losses, but merely characters being removed from a campaign. Relationships would be players role-playing rather than authentic connections. The Duffer Brothers seemed unlikely to choose this path given their demonstrated respect for their story and audience. They'd built a coherent world with internal consistency and emotional authenticity. Revealing it as game within game would constitute betrayal of narrative trust they'd carefully cultivated. Moreover, such twists had been attempted in other media and generally received negative responses. The shock value didn't compensate for the way it hollowed out everything preceding it. Nevertheless, the fact that fans worried about this possibility demonstrated the uncertainty surrounding how the series would conclude. With only teaser footage and episode titles as evidence, nearly anything seemed possible. The Duffer Brothers had kept Season 5's crucial plot developments remarkably secret, despite year-long production that had been extensively photographed by fans and paparazzi. Season 5 occupied a unique position in television history as streaming's first truly planned finale for a series that had achieved cultural phenomenon status. Previous major streaming shows had either been cancelled unexpectedly or had run until creative exhaustion set in. Stranger Things would end with its 5th season by design, with creators knowing the conclusion from early in the show's run and building toward it systematically. This intentionality promised coherent resolution rather than hasty scramble to tie up loose ends. The Duffer Brothers had stated in interviews that they'd always envisioned the show as 4 or 5 season story. By Season 2's planning, they'd committed to 5 seasons as ideal length. This advanced planning allowed them to plant seeds in earlier seasons that would bear fruit in the finale, creating satisfying callbacks and revelations that justified seemingly minor details from years prior. The pressure to deliver satisfying conclusion was immense. Stranger Things had defined Netflix's identity as producer of prestige content. Its success had demonstrated that streaming could create water-cooler television that captured mass attention, despite non-traditional release format. The series had launched careers, revitalized 1980s nostalgia, made Kate Bush relevant to new generation, and proven that science fiction horror could appeal to broad audiences when executed with emotional authenticity and memorable characters. Disappointing ending would taint the entire series retrospectively. Even excellent shows had seen their legacies damaged by poorly executed finales. The Duffer Brothers understood these stakes. Matt Duffer had acknowledged in interviews that completing the show successfully was nerve-wracking, that they were really happy with the way it ended, but aware that people will have opinions. The defensive note in these comments suggested awareness that no conclusion would satisfy everyone. The emotional mathematics of what the show owed its characters complicated the finale's construction. Will Byers had suffered more than anyone across 4 seasons, kidnapped, possessed, exiled, isolated, bullied for his sensitivity and sexuality, forced to watch his best friend love someone else. By any reasonable accounting, Will deserved happy ending. He deserved acceptance, peace, joy, after years of anguish. 11 had been abused from infancy, raised in laboratory as weapon, trained through torture, exploited by every adult who claimed to care for her until she met Joyce Byers and found genuine maternal love. She'd saved everyone repeatedly, sacrificed her powers temporarily, fought monsters, physical and psychological. She deserved the childhood she'd never had, the safety and love that had been denied her. Joyce Byers had lost her son temporarily, her boyfriend permanently, her security and stability repeatedly. She'd fought harder than any parent should need to fight to protect her children. She deserved rest from crisis, freedom from supernatural threats, opportunity to build happy life with Hopper. Lucas, Dustin, Mike, Max, Nancy, Jonathan, Steve, Robin, All had endured trauma and loss that would scar real people permanently. They'd faced death, witnessed friends die, killed in self-defense, made impossible choices. They deserved to survive with their humanity intact, to process their experiences and move forward into futures filled with possibility rather than more horror. Yet storytelling sometimes required tragedy to achieve thematic resonance. Happy endings where everyone survived and thrived could feel unearned or artificial if threats had seemed genuinely apocalyptic. The Upside Down's invasion represented existential danger to all of reality. Overcoming such threats without anyone paying ultimate price might ring false. The question of whether tragedy served story or merely shocked audience had been debated since ancient Greek theatre. Modern prestige television had leaned heavily into grim outcomes, sometimes criticised for deploying character death as substitute for genuine dramatic development. The phrase grimdark had emerged to describe fiction, where relentless misery replaced complex storytelling. Stranger Things had generally avoided this trap by maintaining hope even during darkest moments. The kids' friendship endured despite everything trying to break it. Love persisted when it should have died. People kept fighting when surrender seemed rational. This tonal balance had distinguished the show from bleaker contemporaries. Abandoning it in the finale would feel like betrayal of what had made the series special. The Right Side Up represented more than clever title inversion. It embodied Stranger Things' fundamental belief that darkness, no matter how powerful, could be transformed. Whether through sacrifice or triumph, through loss or restoration, the final chapter promised resolution to mysteries spanning 8 years and 4 terrifying dimensions. The ending would honour both the darkness faced and the light discovered in friendship, love, and courage. Whatever form the Right Side Up took, whether literal dimensional transformation or metaphorical restoration of proper order, it would demonstrate that the long nightmare could end, that horror could be survived and even transcended, that monsters, physical and psychological, could be defeated by people who refused to surrender their humanity despite every reason to do so. Hawkins, Indiana, that small town which had suffered so much, would either be destroyed completely or saved definitively. Its residents would learn whether their years of struggle had meaning or futility. The dimensions would separate permanently or merge completely. The story that began with a boy vanishing on a November night would conclude with revelation of whether vanishing was ending or transformation. And so our journey through Hawkins' darkest possibilities concludes, theories explored and mysteries contemplated. These speculations, disturbing though they may sound, offer the peculiar comfort of fictional fears examined from safety of imagination. The monsters in Stranger Things wait only in stories, and stories provide spaces where darkness can be faced without real danger. What makes these theories particularly compelling isn't their accuracy, but rather what they reveal about how deeply viewers have engaged with the show's mythology and characters. 8 years of investment have created interpretive community that analyses every frame, debates every implication, constructs elaborate explanations that sometimes exceed the source material in complexity and creativity. The truth about Will's powers, the Upside Down's nature, the Wheeler family's fate, Max's consciousness, and the meaning of the Right Side Up will be revealed when Season 5 arrives. The first 4 episodes premiere on November 26, 2025. The next 3 follow on Christmas Day. The finale concludes on New Year's Eve, bringing the series to its end, as one year transforms into another, old giving way to new. Whatever answers the Duffer Brothers provide, whatever revelations and resolutions they've crafted, the theories discussed tonight represent the beautiful complexity of audience engagement with beloved stories. We theorize because we care. We construct elaborate possibilities because these characters and their struggles matter to us. We fear for their fates because we've travelled alongside them through darkness and emerged changed by the journey. As you drift towards sleep, dear listener, know that the theories explored tonight are merely shadows of shadows, speculation about fiction that itself depicts fictional characters confronting supernatural darkness. The real world waits beyond these stories, free from dimensional rifts and psychic monsters. The comfort of considering disturbing possibilities in controlled context is that we can examine darkness without being consumed by it. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your sleep be filled with gentle visions of Hawkins when all the lights are on, when the gates are closed, and when every child makes it safely home. The monsters wait only in stories, and stories, after all, always end. Even when they transform into something new, even when they flip right side up, they provide the gift of resolution. The promise that nightmare, no matter how long, eventually gives way to morning light. The journey through these theories brings us back to where we began, to the comfort of speculation about stories that can frighten us without truly harming us. 5 disturbing possibilities examined, 5 paths the final season might follow, each constructed from careful observation of patterns established across 8 years of storytelling. These theories exist in the space between what has been shown and what might be revealed. They represent the beautiful uncertainty of waiting for answers to questions we've carried since Will Byers first vanished into darkness. Whether Will possesses hidden powers, whether the upside down is dimension or future or psychic manifestation, whether a Wheeler will vanish, whether Max will become something terrible, whether the finale will transform nightmare into paradise, these possibilities will soon transition from speculation to certainty. The answers approach as autumn 2025 progresses toward winter. Volume 1 arrives on November 26th, delivering the season's first 4 episodes. Christmas Day brings 3 more. New Year's Eve, as one year dies and another begins, will reveal the conclusion that Matt and Ross Duffer have been building towards since they first imagined a boy on a bicycle being taken by something from another world. Until then, these theories provide companionship in the waiting. They give shape to anticipation, transforming passive consumption into active engagement with beloved characters and their struggles. The theorizing itself becomes part of the experience, communities forming around shared curiosity and affection for a story that has meant something profound to millions of viewers across the globe. Perhaps what makes bedtime the perfect time for disturbing theories is the safety of the context. Lying in comfortable darkness, warm and protected, we can contemplate terrible possibilities for fictional people without the anxiety such thoughts would produce about real loved ones. The horror is contained, bounded by the knowledge that whatever happens in Hawkins happens only in imagination, only in that peculiar space where stories live. Stranger Things has given us permission to be frightened again, the way we were as children, when monsters under beds seemed plausible and shadows held genuine menace. But it has also given us the antidote to that fear, the reminder that friendship and love provide protection more reliable than any weapon. That courage matters even when we're terrified, that choosing to care about others despite the pain it might cause is what separates us from the monsters we face. These themes will echo through whatever conclusion the Duffer Brothers have crafted. The specifics of plot resolution matter less than the emotional truth at the story's centre. That people who connect deeply, who protect each other, who refuse to surrender their humanity despite corruption pressing in from all sides, those people can survive even apocalypse, can transform even hell into something bearable, through the simple, stubborn insistence that love is more powerful than hate. Rest well in this knowledge, dear listener. The theories we've explored tonight are merely possibilities, shadows of a story still unfolding. Tomorrow, they may prove prescient or completely wrong, but tonight, they're simply companions keeping you company as consciousness fades towards sleep. The comfortable darkness of your room holds no gates to other dimensions, no psychic monsters hunting through dreams, just the gentle quiet of a world where the most frightening things exist safely in stories, where every nightmare has an ending, and where morning always returns. Sleep softly. The final chapter waits patiently for its time, and when it arrives we will discover together what became of the children who fought monsters in the dark and emerged into whatever light remains. Until then, rest in the space between knowing and wondering, where imagination and affection for these characters creates its own kind of magic. Good night.